Hello, this is Paul Johnson with the Optimistic American. You know, we exist to try and help rekindle the American spirit. I have two guests today, both Eric Bronner as well as Chris Sylvester, who have done a lot to try and help that American spirit. Both of them are Annapolis grads. Both of them have served as officers in the United States Navy. Their missions by themselves have been very interesting to listen to. But today, we're going to talk to them about maybe one of the most important missions that they've been on. They're trying to help us heal the divisions that exist in America. Both of these individuals are involved in an organization called the Veterans for Political Innovation. You can look them up online. They're definitely worth taking part in, but they're veterans who are trying to help us resolve our problems through political reforms. I think you're going to enjoy this show. Thanks for being with us. And again, if you get a chance, push that subscribe button. Become part of our family. Or if you'd like, go to optamerican.com/premium and become one of our Patriot members. Thanks again. Now we're on with our show. Well, again, Eric and Chris, I'd like to welcome you both to the show. We're very excited to have you on today to talk about the political reforms that are happening not just in Arizona, but around the country. I know veterans are playing a big role in trying to help make this happen. Veterans, interestingly enough, about half of them register as independent or other voters, and that gives them kind of a special purpose in this. But what I'd like to start by doing is understanding your organization, the Veterans for Political Innovation. Eric, maybe if you could give us a little bit about what that organization is about and what you're trying to do.
Sure, Paul. Thanks so much for having us. It's great to be here with a fellow Naval Academy grad, Chris Sylvester. Thanks for having us. So Veterans for Political Innovation, we launched about a little less than 2 years ago to mobilize some of America's most trusted messengers to help repair some of our least trusted institutions. And how are we doing that specifically? It's state-based campaigns for better elections, for better politics, for more choices, and we can get into the details later.
All right, awesome. And this is a question now for both of you. Before we go into the reforms, tell me about your service to the country, the jobs that you had, what you actually did, what role you played for the United States military. Chris, we'll start with you.
Sure. Hey, Paul, I actually started out in the Army, believe it or not, in the Arizona National Guard. I enlisted as a junior in high school. I went to what's called a split training option. And then after boot camp, I finished my senior year in high school. But about halfway through my senior year in high school is when the first Gulf War started to happen. And when we went into Iraq in January of 1991, actually. Mm-hmm. So my unit deployed without me, and so the Navy recruiter came along and said, "Hey, I got a better deal for you." So I joined the Navy as an enlisted guy going submarines, and about halfway through my submarine training, I got an opportunity to apply for the Naval Academy. I took it, I ran with it. I graduated with a physics degree. I became a helicopter pilot and went on to become an instructor pilot for fixed-wing aircraft. And then I transitioned into the acquisition world, where I focused on bringing new naval aircraft into service. Specifically, I focused on the V-22 Osprey. The Navy sent me for some additional schooling, and then I transferred into the space world. And I finished off in the intelligence community, working some satellites. And I retired in August to September of 2015.
All right, I got to dig in just a little bit. You were telling me before we started the show about what you did on helicopters on search and rescue missions. Just give me a little bit of that. That was fun stuff.
Oh my gosh, it was incredible. My first tour was in the island of Guam. And I was technically I was assigned to the island of Guam for 3 years, but my wife will tell you that she was assigned to the island of Guam for 3 years. I was only assigned to the island of Guam for half that much because I was always out on deployment. I think perhaps the most interesting flight I ever had was probably the first flight that I had as a search and rescue helicopter pilot. 50 miles off the island of Guam, and we reached a fishing vessel, and the gentleman had been impaled by a swordfish. He was bringing him out, and the swordfish went right through his gut. And so what we did is we picked him up and we flew him back to the island hospital. That imagery will never leave my head.
Yeah, because it was named after Phoenix, the USS Phoenix, I spent quite a few different voyages on getting to go out and help drive the submarine and everything else. What I remember was it being on the surface of the water when that boat would turn sideways and up and down at the same time. It was the most sickening feeling, but the minute it dove underneath the water, it was just like smooth sailing, and all the sailors would applaud. All right, so Eric, the area of the service that you participated in.
Yeah, so my path was pretty different in that I went straight from high school to the Naval Academy. And for people like me who had no military background or training, we really looked up to folks like Chris who were prior enlisted. They just had a lot of real world experience that, frankly, I didn't know which end was up when it came to anything military related. But so we both graduated in 1997. I went down to flight school in Pensacola, Florida. I served for 8 years as a naval flight officer in the mighty E-2C Hawkeye. And we launched on and off of aircraft carriers. I was part of the George Washington Battle Group. And in 2000, went on a six-month deployment in 2000 to the Mediterranean and Persian Gulf. And the joke in the back of the E-2C, there's 3 of us. And if you've ever taken your worst passenger experience in an automobile and you multiply that by about 10, that's what it was like on the White Knuckle Express landing on an aircraft carrier.
Oh, wow. Yeah, the United, first, to both of you, thank you guys for your service that you've done already. Certainly thank you for the service that you're still providing, but I just think that that's amazing, and I'd like to thank both of you. The fact that you went through the Naval Academy, my hat's off to you. That is an amazing thing all in itself. Here's the question I want to ask you. So why does political reform matter to veterans? Why is it even important?
Sure. I'll speak from the perspective of a reformer, and then Chris has a perspective of someone who ran for office and saw the inside of the beast, so to speak. But, as a reformer, why are veterans getting on board with this mission? You mentioned before we started, Paul, close to 50% of veterans don't identify with either major party. I'm one of them. I've never affiliated with any political party. I've never joined or said I was a R or a D. I've been a lifelong independent. And for veterans, it makes a lot of sense, and even my partisan veteran friends, they would agree that we all swore an oath to the Constitution, not to a political party, not to a political leader, right? And that oath to the Constitution matters more than anything else. And so you have a ripe audience of folks who want to continue serving their country. They're tired of the two-party doom loop that we're stuck in. They want to see real solutions implemented. They want to see problem solvers elected, not grandstanders and show horses. And we think reforms are the best path. Changing the system itself is the best path to making our politics and our country better.
Chris.
So, Paul, growing up, I always considered myself an independent thinker. And as I grew into adulthood, I always considered myself to be part of the Republican Party because I thought it was a little bit more fiscally conservative. And to me, that's where I aligned, right? Just on the fiscally conservative portion. And so when I got out of the military and I was looking at moving back to Arizona and I wanted to get my roots seated deep back into the state, I was taking a look around and seeing what was on the horizon. And I figured I was going to try and make a positive difference because I disagreed in large part with how a particular representative was representing District 8 at the time. And so I jumped into the race, not too aware of the ramifications of the political upset that I was about to make, right? And so the gentleman that was currently serving as the district representative was on the Republican ticket. And I have learned over the course of time that the Republican Party does not take kindly to anybody trying to upset the machine that's already in place. So one of the rules of the game is you never try and unseat an incumbent that's a part of your own party. And so I thought that would probably be the best way to make some headlines, right? It was really out of trying to maintain a personal sense of integrity, because I believe that in a lot of cases, whatever we do now, we can always do it better, and there's always room for improvement. And if you see something wrong with the system, then you should really try and fix it. And I really earnestly felt that the gentleman that was incumbent at the time was not the best representative, and I thought that I could undo him. And so when I jumped in the race, I felt that the best waves that I could make would be on a positive note and out of respect. But I noticed that nobody else in the Republican infrastructure in District 8 would dare touch it with a 10-foot pole, because they knew they would be political suicide. And so what was interesting is I met with a couple different people on Capitol Hill. I flew up to Capitol Hill and I went around and I met with a couple of folks that were actually in office, and I wanted to let them know that I was going to be running for office for CD8. And then I actually met the governor at the time, had a breakfast. I shook his hand and I said, "Governor," I said, "I'm going to be running for CD8, and I'd love to have coffee with you one time and figure out a best path forward." He asked me who was the current representative. I told him who it was. And he says, "You know what?" He says, "You don't need to do that. You don't need to upset him. He's a good guy. We need to keep him in office." Lo and behold, maybe 3 months later, that same representative resigned from office in December of 2017 due to a variety of what some people would call ethical issues. And to me, that just proves that my spidey senses were right. Something was off with this guy. But it wasn't until his resignation that the well-known politicians jumped into the race, right? So my frustration and the story that I take back is it's disheartening to realize that there was what I consider to be a lack of fortitude, a lack of willing to upset the current institution because of a fear of political ramification. And so it wasn't until that gentleman stepped aside and resigned that my race of me versus him, which is one-on-one, became 12 in the race. And so that particular instance, to this day, it's so invigorating, because I realized, okay, so this is how this works. And so now going back to kind of the root of your question is why Eric's organization is so important for veterans, is because I think veterans have a lot of so much to offer from a different perspective based on a life experience that is global, right? We've seen and we've worked with, and we've led, and we're being led by people that are just from all around the world, right? And unless you start to play this bipartisan political game right out of high school, right out of college, the chances of you to be an instantiated incumbent are minimal to none. And I think what it does is it really it makes this barrier to entry something that we need to knock down.
Yeah, the existing system is really designed to protect incumbents, right? When you think of all the existing rules, like 80% of our congressional districts are gerrymandered, meaning whoever wins the primary, they win the general election. Well, what's that designed to do? To keep anybody from competing with them, so they don't have to worry about there being a real election where every voter can vote. And then in the primary, what do they want? Well, they want to make certain that they have as few opponents there as possible. The idea is to limit choices. Why? Because it's designed around the incumbents. It's designed around incumbents winning. It's not designed around better democracy, better choices, more ideas, people being able to think constructively about the problem. So let's talk, if we can, just for a moment, about the system itself and what challenges that we think exist that maybe we'd like to try to change. And Eric, your organization has put a lot of thought into that. So why don't we start with you on that one?
Sure. And Paul, the why behind our mission really does come from the research and scholarship that went into this 2020 book. I think you're familiar with The Politics Industry, Catherine Gale.
Yeah, she's been on our show.
Yeah, right. And their research, they studied the reform marketplace. They studied the politics industry. She had the novel idea of taking Harvard Business School professor Michael Porter's 5 forces and applying them to politics. to no one's surprise, it's a very unhealthy, anti-competitive industry, right? So the theory of change is, to your point, with 83% of our congressional districts gerrymandered and no real competition in 83% of our races in November or more, on the state level, many states it's even higher. We don't have any means to hold our representatives accountable to what the majority of Americans want. We literally have no means to hold our representatives accountable. And what you said is so true. The system is designed to protect incumbents at all costs. It's designed to maintain power and control from our two private gain-seeking parties. They write all of the rules for their own benefit. You just look at the rules for what it takes for an independent candidate to get on the ballot in any state. It's usually 5 to 10 times more difficult, more money. So our theory of change is we have to go state by state and change the way we do elections. And our North Star is two things in our North Star. One is that every single eligible voter should be allowed to vote for any candidate in every single public election. That's called a fully open, unified primary. Get rid of private political parties telling voters who can and cannot participate in public elections. And then 2 is real competition in every single race in November. And the only way you can get to that is the fully open, unified primary. And then some states have a top 2 runoff. Some have a top 4 or final 5 instant runoff. And that's the reform that we are most excited about at Veterans for Political Innovation.
Yeah, when you think about these numbers, I think they're fascinating. So today, about 70% of every potential voter that could be registered is. 44% of America is registered as an independent or other voter. It's the single largest group. All right, so about 30% are Democrat, 30% are Republicans. That's not hard to do the math. Well, 30% by the 70% means you're talking about 21% of the people are in either political party. However, the turnout in a primary is only about 30 to 35%. So times the 35% by the 20%, now you're talking about 6% of the public. And if you have a divided race, you're being selected by 3 or 4. And then a gerrymandered district where 85% of legislative seats or congressional seats are done, there's no general, meaning in 85% of these seats, it's less than 5% of the total public making the decision for who will represent us.
Yep.
Chris, did you want to give any comment on that?
No, you highlighted an interesting point, Paul, is that when you take a look at who's voting and then the number of the votes that really start to decide who's in power and who's making these policies, it really drives home to the fact that our system right now is riddled with what I consider two effects, right? Apathy and ignorance. And a lot of the apathy is driven by the fact that people just feel like, I'm not going to make a difference, right? And the ignorance is it's kind of a twofold, right? It's how do you actually get the information that you need? So some of the ignorance is just, it's not really incumbent upon the person, but they don't have the access to the information that they need. And then there's a piece of the ignorance that really is kind of, people have to own a level of ignorance because of who they're choosing to vote for and why they're choosing to make that vote.
Yeah, I had a guy I asked one time on a very specific issue because it was like no one was willing to talk about the problem. I said, well, do you think people are apathetic or are they ignorant? And he says, I don't know and I don't care. So that's all right. So I want to go back to a point that you mentioned earlier, Eric, because I think this is important. You made the comment that both of you, when you swore in as being a part of the U.S. military, you swore your oath to a constitution. And you pointed out that it was not only not to any party, more importantly, it wasn't to any man. It wasn't to any president or any senator or any other individual. What we know that happens inside the existing partisan system is that because of all those facts that we just laid out, you end up giving an incredible amount of power to one or two people. So I'll pick on the Democratic Party without naming a name. If in the Democratic Party you get one person who is good at fundraising, who has been able to accumulate power, And they decide in the Democratic Party that you're not the person that they want to keep. And they primary you, meaning they go get somebody to run against you who is either more liberal or more conservative, in the Democratic Party, more liberal, to target you. You're probably going to lose, right? So what happens is it instills a discipline, not the discipline to a constitution, the discipline to a party that is run by a handful of people. So it's not only about incumbent protection. That's what's being protected in the existing system. But more importantly, it's driving that power up to a very few, sometimes a single individual who has the power to determine how everybody else in that party is going to think. Because if they don't think the right way, they'll primary them and they'll get someone else in who does. That by itself is a violation of those principles that you took on as veterans. But it really is one that we ought to think about as Americans. As Americans, all of us should be sworn to the Constitution. Let's talk about that idea, if you would, just for a moment.
Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree more, Paul. We are a constitutional republic. Our operating system is a representative democracy. That operating system needs upgrades from time to time. And what you just described has General George Washington rolling over in his grave, right? I mean, our last independent president warned us not to let partisan interests and partisan factions be more important than our shared American identity and our shared loyalty to the Constitution. And I get really tired, Paul, of, people, there's these incredible words that are powerful, such as patriot. You cannot claim to be a patriot and be more loyal to a political leader or a political party than you are to the Constitution. So let's just make that a matter of fact. If you're more loyal to a political party or a political leader than to the Constitution, you are not a patriot. Just be honest about it.
Chris, I'd love your opinion.
So, Paul, both you and Eric are making very solid points, right? And we're in violent agreement with this. And to illustrate that point even further, what I think is interesting is that everything that you say is slowly and methodically justified. And the reason why people say that they do this is because it's for a better cause, right? It's I'm going to sacrifice something of my own because the party is a better cause. But I think we're losing sight of the fact that the party is not the country. It's not the Constitution. It's not the overall set of ideals. It's one faction, one small sliver of what people stand up for and what people believe in. If I may relay one more piece of the story, right, as I was starting on my campaign back in 2017 to run for Congress, I had the opportunity to meet with a campaign manager for a very senior politician who is no longer in politics right now. And he promised me that, he says, I'll meet with you, but you can't ever let anybody know that I met with you because, again, right, he wouldn't want to touch me with a 10-foot pole. And he told me, you're going to lose and nobody's going to want to touch you. He says, what are you trying to do? And I said, I'm trying to make a change without compromising my integrity. And he looked at me straight in the eye and he says, I respect that. He says, but you're never going to do it. He says, you can only do one of the two things. You can either maintain your integrity or you can maintain a change, or you can affect a change. And that's when it hit me. I said, okay, you're going to have to choose. And so I said, thank you very much. And again, I still tried to do both.
Yeah. It's when you think about this constitutional question, I find it so fascinating. The single most important reason that I believe that America is great, and we have done unbelievably great things in our military, in our private sector, in everything from our government's done amazing things. Our government's done amazing things in building out roadways and dams and even getting people to the moon. But the single greatest thing our government ever did is it empowered the individual over itself. And it protected the individual through that Constitution. Right? It protected it through the Bill of Rights. It protected it through the 7 Articles by saying that this was a government that was designed by the people and for the people. Now, The reason that we swear our allegiance to that Constitution is we're really swearing our allegiance back to that idea that every individual matters, that every individual is filled with dignity. That is a very old concept. In fact, it's based in Christian Judeo values. If you look at, Martin Luther, who was a reformist, he had this revelation from God that said, no, you don't have to buy indulgences. You have a direct connection to him. Well, Jean Rousseau, who wrote The Social Contract, later on said, hey, if it was important enough for God to give each person dignity, government has to do the same thing. That is not a thought that's shared around the world. There are lots of places around the world that says, no, the individual doesn't matter. There is no such thing as individual dignity. It's about the collective, and the collective as determined by a party or by an individual. That's really what our military's dealing with on a constant basis, is this struggle between these groups who really think that authoritarian governments and putting the collective first is more important than the individual. That's the struggle we see with Russia, with China, with Iran, with other places, and the free world. So we swear our allegiance to a constitution, not to a man, because we know that men are fallible. They make mistakes. We swear it to a concept and an idea. Again, the role that you guys have played in the process long before we got here is trying to make certain that that concept was protected.
Absolutely. And what's so heartbreaking, Paul, and the reason my two co-founders, Dan Biga, a Marine Corps veteran, and Todd Connor, a fellow Navy veteran, why we started Veterans for Political Innovation, we were heartbroken over the state of play in American politics, and the fact that the industry and the media plays fellow citizens against each other like pawns in a zero-sum game. And that game is all about them making more money and maintaining their own power and control. And we are literally being played like pawns to hate the other side. We no longer vote for people. We vote against the other side. We can't imagine the other side having anything redeemable about them. And it does not have to be this way, right? I mean, we broke out of Coke versus Pepsi a long time ago. Why can't we do that in politics? We just want more competition. And as a reformer, I get punched in the face from both sides with some of the same talking points, right? This is, you can't change the system. Who are you? And blah, blah, blah. And I get accused of being a tool of one side or the other. It just depends on if I'm in a red state, I'm a tool for the Democrats. If I'm in a blue state, I'm a tool for the Republicans. It's so silly that people buy into this BS that the political industry sells us every single day.
Yeah, we're equal opportunity offenders. We offend both sides. So, Chris, you were going to say something?
We should be. And I think what's interesting, too, is kind of capitalizing what Eric's getting at is if you follow that through all the way to some of the senior military folks that have now gotten out of the military and into the fray of politics, and you can tell that there are some folks that are trying to preserve what they worked for the past 25, 30, 35 years in the military. But then there are some other military officers that are getting out and they're trying to ride this wave of celebrity politician, right? And they're trying to achieve that 15 seconds of fame. And they seem to just discount all of the integrity and the leadership that they were trying to instill upon others for the previous 25, 30 years. So I think there's so many different facets at play that are driving people to make these, what I would consider irrational decisions. And the motivations, I think, are at times very disheartening to say the least, right? It's just the instantaneous 15 seconds of fame, and then, but then that drives on in perpetuity. And then, Eric, you bring up a good point, right? People try and leverage that, and they'll try and drive a wedge into, well, you should vote for this guy because he's military or she was military, and this is what they believe in. And then, but the other side plays the exact same wedge. I think the role of the military needs to help be a force of preservation and just a force of reminding everything what we're here for, and make sure that stands around for a long time. But I think it's incumbent upon the senior military officials as they get up and out to leverage that experience, not for a partisan sake, but rather try and help bring us back together.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about the system that we'd like to propose, what that system might look like, and what why it might be better. Eric, you spent a lot of time on this around the country in different places. So why don't we start with you talking about that?
Sure. And so the system that Veterans for Political Innovation is most excited about implementing in cities and states across the country, we call it Final Five voting. It's the combination of a fully open, unified primary election. The first round of voting, there's just one ballot, all candidates on one ballot, regardless of party. So as an independent voter, I can pick the best candidate, regardless of party. The top 5 finishers for each race go to November, and then the voter can decide. You can vote for one, or you can rank all 5. And if you rank all 5, that's you choosing to participate in an instant runoff voting if needed. We have runoffs. 6 southern states already use ranked choice voting and instant runoff for their military and overseas voters. Saves taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it allows military overseas voters to fully participate in runoffs. So the system, Final Five, one thing that gives me a lot of hope, Paul, is this has been implemented in Alaska. My co-founder, Todd Connor, and I just got back from Alaska less than 2 weeks ago. The results are tremendous. The impact is immediate. Of course, Final Five voting is not a silver bullet. It's not going to solve all of our problems, but it fundamentally changes bad incentives created by partisan primary elections, the race to the extremes, the fueling of the base, right? We no longer have party bosses. We have the 3 to 6% base that determines 83% of our races. That's what we're trying to get away from. Alaska's already done it. Great, really great results there. We can talk about more later. Nevada had a ballot amendment in 2022. We're going to have to pass that again in 2024 to amend their constitution. I know you're working on a ballot amendment for Final Five voting in Arizona. Idaho has launched a ballot amendment. New York City, Wisconsin has bipartisan legislation pending. So this is happening. This is not pie in the sky. This is not Don Quixote on a fool's errand. This is really happening, and we need more good Americans who are concerned about the future of our country to get involved with this movement.
Yeah, so let's break that down a little bit more. So let's start with the very first election that you talked about. Every candidate just simply runs in an open primary. That's the very first election. And then they move forward to a runoff if they're one of the top 5 candidates. In cities, 70% of the cities, it's the top 2, but they still have that open primary. So what that open primary does by itself, just talking about that piece, is it immediately eliminates the benefits to incumbents from gerrymandering. Because now, even though they have a safe district, they still have to face every voter in that first election. Every voter has a chance to have a say on them. Now, it may very well be that you send 4 or 5 Republicans in a Republican district to the runoff. That's possible. That could happen. Or that you send 4 or 5 Democrats. But the odds are you're going to get 4 or 5 people that are going to have a mixture of people, a mixture of Democrats, Republicans, and independents. But nonetheless, no matter what happens in that first election, you have to go talk to every voter. Now, Chris, you ran for office, and I'm sure that you had the same thing. When I ran for city council the first time, I ran in an open primary. I had 90,000 people in my district. I was a registered Democrat at the time. I'm an independent today. But when I won that seat, it was a 4 or 5 to 1 Republican district. Again, I was a Democrat, and it was in a year of Ronald Reagan. I knocked on every door, every Republican door, every Democratic door, every independent door. Why? Well, because they could all vote for me, right? Or vote against me, either way. And so what happened was I had to listen to them. I'd hear different things from Democrats that I did Republicans. Democrats, I'd hear about their park or their school or the neighborhood. Oftentimes from Republicans, I heard about their business or the military or things that they were more concerned about. It wasn't hard to figure out, hey, maybe these things are connected, right? Maybe we need a strong business community to have the revenue to be able to pay for those social programs that the Democrats that I was talking to were talking about. But then I ran for governor, like you ran for Congress. I didn't, in the primary, go talk to every voter. The only voters that I went and spoke to were the people who were the most high efficacy voter in the Democratic primary. And here's the answer to that. They were very different than the voters that I was talking to in an open primary. My guess in your congressional seat, I loved the conversation that we had beforehand where you said your goal in the beginning was to try to get everybody together around a table to talk about the problems, that was the vision. But it became clear very quickly that it was just a small group of people you were going to be talking to. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, sir. Again, admittedly, it was probably a vision of grandeur, right? But I just imagine, right, a representative being true to the name, being true to the title of representative, right? And not just reaching out to saying, hey, I'm on the red ticket, so I'm only going to listen to the red folks, and if you're blue, I'm not listening to you. I had this vision of maybe once a quarter bringing the district or various folks that could make it, maybe into like the auditorium at a local university, right? And then somehow I'd create some sort of like an app on the phone, right? So as we're talking about different levels of topics, different, whatever the hot topic would be, we cover 3 or 4 in any given session, right? People could provide instant feedback on this app and say, okay, I'm interested in this. I want to learn more about this, all this kind of stuff. But at the end of that, we could take that data back and say, okay, this is where the folks of the district are leaning towards on these different topics, and then go back and take that back to Capitol Hill and truly represent based on data-driven analytics. Again, I know it's pie in the sky, but I believe we can get to a system where we get there, right? Everybody has a say in that issue, right? And you don't necessarily have to, you could be talking to the wide gamut of folks, right, on both far spectrums of there, right? And if you just use statistics and just analytics and you start to combine that with the passion of what people are talking about, I think you can make a pretty good, well-informed decision that would lead to a very solid vote that is truly representative.
Okay.
If I may, can I tell you about this real quick story? As I was getting signatures for myself, right? Just to get on the ballot, I still have the shoes with the holes in the bottom that I wore out just to get those signatures. I got over 1,700 people to sign my petition just to get on the ballot. And I collected over 1,400 of those myself. And the most rewarding signature I got on that ballot still sticks with me to this day. It was in Sun City. And I knocked on the gentleman's door, and I knew he was Republican because, again, once you're part of the Republican machine, you get access to so many tools. And I had this app on my phone that says, you want to go knock on all these doors, right? And this is part of the machine that is so powerful, but yet we need to overcome. I knocked on this gentleman's door and I said, hey, sir, I'm running for office. Can I count on your vote? Can you put me on the ballot? And he asked me this question through his locked screen door. He goes, did you vote for the current president? And I looked at him and I knew I just signed my death. I just signed my death warrant. I said, no, sir, I did not. He goes, I want nothing to do with you. And he went to shut the door. And I said, wait a minute, sir, before you shut that door, I want to let you know that I could have answered you one of 2 ways. I could have said yes and got your signature, or I could have told you no, been honest with you, and let you know that I want to still listen to you. And so we talked for about another 3 or 4 minutes. He signed my petition. He unlocked his door. He signed my petition because I was able to get past that personality of you're either my way or the highway. And that was the most memorable signature of my 1,700 that I got.
Yeah, 2 things I'm just going to mention on the signatures because I find it interesting. If you decided to run on a statewide office in Arizona for governor, senator, secretary of state, you need about 6,000 signatures as a Republican. You need about 6,000 signatures as a Democrat. But if you decided to run without a party as an independent, you have to have 50,000 signatures. 50, almost 60,000, actually 58,000. Imagine what your shoes would look like after 58,000 signatures trying to lock them up. It's by the way, it's impossible, and it's done to protect incumbents. Again, that's why the rules have been set up. Now, let me ask you another question. It's a deviation just a little bit. So I want to go into your definitions of leadership because I find this to be interesting, and I'm going to give you mine, but I am really interested. Both of you have been through Annapolis. You've both led people in a variety of different ways. So I'd like to know your view of it. My view of a leader is leaders don't know everything. That's just not true. I have a company of 400 people. My partner and I do our best to lead them, but we don't know everything. What I found in being mayor, I didn't know everything. Now, the leader has to make a decision. There's a decision that has to be made to move an organization forward. And those decisions sometimes are hard, and sometimes people are upset with you for the decision that you're making. But you have to make the call as the leader. But I also find in being a leader that I have to engage the best of everyone and to do my best to understand that everybody brings something to the table, regardless of what neighborhood they're from what party they're registered in, their experiences in life, that if I can engage everyone, I can draw the best experiences in. But I still have to make the decision. Now, I know you guys have been in military organizations and things are more hierarchical maybe than I've experienced in the private sector and in political, but I'd just like to have your definition of leadership. It's interesting for me, even if it's not necessarily part of the discussion. Eric, I'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a person of faith, right? So and I'm a Christian. So I think the best, most amazing leader on the planet was our founder. And look, there's other great thought leaders, such as Jim Collins in his famous book, Good to Great. His definition of
Great
a level
book.
5 leader was a servant leader who really knows their people and who really cares about their people. And yes, has a clear vision and is on mission and makes tough decisions. But, it's really, I think being a good leader comes down to being a good servant. And that's just not popular these days.
Yeah, we just reviewed his book as part of the Optimistic American Book Club. It's online. Chris.
That's a great one.
I'd love to hear yours.
I think the foundation of good leadership is rooted in empathy and mutual respect. At the place where I work, just last week, I went up to the gentleman that's the janitor, and I said, "Hey, it's lunchtime. Can you take some time off?" And so we went out to the local food truck, and I bought him a lunch. And we were sitting down eating, and he turns to me and he says, "You know what?" He says, "Nobody's ever done this for me before." And I said, "Well, that's too bad, because that to me that shows that just not enough people are willing to get to know you." And then we talked, and so now every single day when I pass him in the hall, he's no longer the janitor. He's Robert, right? He's Robert with the cool looking vacuum cleaner on his back, and I tell him he looks like a Ghostbuster. And now we have this connection. So to me, leadership is rooted in empathy and mutual respect, regardless of the person, gender, skin color, nationality, ethnicity. Get to know each other, get to know one another, and respect each other.
All right, so this ties to me into the second part of the reform. The first part of the reform, which we spoke about a moment ago, is just the issue of making certain that everybody has to run against one another and that every voter has a right to have a say on you. So there are no more free rides for politicians, no more free rides for incumbents. You can't gerrymander your way out of having competition. But the second thing that we talk about is then having these people move forward where you can vote for your first place person, your second place person, your third place person, your fourth place person, right? And if your first place person doesn't get it, if they end up coming in last, then your second place person goes into vogue. Now, the reason that that's interesting to me, when you run, even in city elections, when you run in a top two, meaning we ran in a general election, everybody ran against one another, no primary. But then when you get to the top two, it's mano a mano, two different people who are running against one another. There is an incredible incentive to go negative. It just exists. When there are just two people in a race, there's an incredible incentive to go negative. But you can't go negative when there's 3 people or when there's 4 or when there's 5, because you can't go negative against both of them at the same time. And if you go negative against one person, the person that you didn't go negative against rises. They go up. It makes it more complex. Now, I know there are other reasons to support. We'll talk more about those. But to me, that's important because, Chris, what you just said, which is, how can we be empathetic for someone after we just spent time doing everything that we could to undermine them? The existing system incentivizes us to be negative about one another. Eric, Chris, either one of you have a comment on that?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And, Paul, to go negative, and this is, we call it negative polarization, right? Is that it's what I said earlier, no longer voting for people or because I think this person has great ideas. It's just voting against the other person who's been demonized. And we wonder why we get such terrible outcomes. So yeah, when you have more competition in every other industry, we know That's how the customer gets better results, is through more real competition. That's all we want in our politics.
When you start going negative, right, you undermine your own credibility. And then you start to chip away, whether you like it or not, at the other person's credibility. So no matter who rises to the top as a result of the votes, somebody is rising to the top with less credibility than when they started. And that, I think, makes it almost impossible to really trust that person as they move forward, because you just can't trust them, because you know that when the going gets tough, then you know how low they're willing to go. So if you can pick somebody based on their ability to go high and positive and lift everyone up, that was my as a matter of fact, that was my motto for when I was running. Right, I wanted to elevate the eighth, and that was what the pins that I had on for everyone. And I never went negative. As a matter of fact, I hope you can understand that. That's why I'm not trying to mention any names of the previous, throughout this entire talk with you right now, because I'm still maintaining the concept that everyone I ran against, I know they were a good person somewhere, right? But I just didn't think they were right for that particular job. And so, again, the whole going negative does nothing but undermine credibility and detract from getting the job done.
Yeah, I want you to just think about this, because I found this to be interesting. I've managed locally and one nationally 3 different presidential campaigns. I've been involved in lots of different races for lots of different friends. I remember once talking to a political team about the idea of being aspirational, right? The importance of talking about what it is that we want to try to accomplish as opposed to what it is that we're against. And this particular pollster pointed out to me that, and by the way, a great pollster, the data was good. They were usually spot on, but the advice was, that's not how campaigns work. The pollster said, look, here's how campaigns work. We have to go out and terrify our base about the other side. We have to make them believe that the other side is so demonic that they won't even think about voting for them. And then when we get done doing that, there are going to be a group of independents who are going to be in the center that we would not have communicated with in the primary. With that group of people, we just have to convince them that the other side is more evil than our side. Right? Now, it's not just politicians that have figured this out, right? The political parties and politicians. Social media has figured it out. That's what those rabbit holes are called, right? It's the rabbit holes to take you down into these negative environments that tell you how bad things are going in the United States and whose fault it is. That's also what the nightly news is doing today. They pick sides. It's no longer the Walter Cronkite era where we get to hear the news by an unbiased person. We now have these 2 news medias who are feeding us information, playing off of our fears, telling us how bad things are, and blaming the other side. We have a lot of people attacking the United States and who we are. We have very few people who are standing up and saying, hey, this is a good place. There are really good attributes to this place. We should be proud of who we are and our U.S. military, and proud of the system that we built and the things that we've been able to accomplish. Instead, it's a constant barrage of negative under the existing system. And the system, absolutely, the architecture is playing a huge role in promoting that. Chris?
One of the most exciting things about Eric's campaign in terms of the changing just how we vote, right, is it opens up the realm of solutions that we are now exposed to in terms of fixing things. Right, so I work for a company that makes space products, and we have technical challenges all the time. And I guarantee you, when the engineers come to me and say, "Hey, boss, we've got an issue," I don't always come back and say, "Give me 2 solutions, and we'll pick the best of the 2." I say, "Put all the solutions on the table, and let's do that." And that's exactly what Eric's proposing. Moreover, it's going to drive down the amount of money that's forced to feed these campaigns, because everyone really has a lower barrier of entry. And what's exciting about that is, if you think about all the amount of money that's just sucked up by politics and elections and just this nonsense that just is literally wasted, and if we can just reroute that money into positive forces, right? Imagine how many times over, and I know I'm thinking really out of way here, but imagine how many times over we could have started attacking different versions of cancer, and how many more diseases would have been cured by these millions and billions of dollars that are thrown out every single year. We have much better ways to spend our money than going negative on people. We can save lives, we can make changes, and we can make us a better place than what we are.
Eric.
Well said, Chris. And there's so much to talk about there. We have a politics and a media industry that feeds off of the negative outrage cycle. And, the media makes a lot of money off of elections, right? And the negative attack ads, just in Georgia alone, for the runoff, the most recent runoff for the U.S. Senate, $75 million could have been saved for administering the runoff. That does not include the over 100 million spent on negative attack ads. So it's, when we talk about making politics less toxic, that's part of our mission. We're talking about getting rid of this. You won't be able to win in final five voting system. You will not be able to win with negative, demonizing attack ads. They just won't work.
That's exactly right. And by the way, you had mentioned Alaska. I have the majority leader, the Republican majority leader, who is in Alaska today, who opposed the system in the beginning and now has gotten to the point where she's managing the majority there. And she said, not only is it working, it's working beyond anything she would have imagined. She said, to start with, she's working with Democrats. Now, she says there are some people who get mad about that, but those people are now the marginalized ones, not the ones. Today, we marginalize the ones who are wanting to cross the aisle. She said, today, the marginalized ones are the ones who are on the extremes who get mad about crossing the aisle. And her point was, look, we're engaging Democrats, Republicans, the best of everyone. The fighting has dramatically dropped. People are more focused on the problem and less focused on the divisions. And at the end of the day, I think that's what this is really about. And I do think that's why veterans care about it. I do think that's why people register as an independent or other voter, because we're tired of the divisions. We want to try. It doesn't mean we think that we're going to be in nirvana and everybody's going to agree, but we want to agree in a civil way and try and help move things forward and make it better for our country, our family, our veterans, and for our home communities.
What's exciting about that, what you just relayed, is it shows that it brings out the best in people, right? So the majority leader is showing incredible signs of leadership because she is actually willing to admit that she has evolved in her thought process and has taken this process and has run with it and has taken it for what it's worth, right? She could have defended her previous position by saying, no, this is a horrible solution, we're not going to do it, and I'm still working with it despite what happened. But she has realized that, you know what, it's a positive change, and she's owning that, and that's enough. If that enabled her to become even a better and stronger leader, then you're getting a positive unintended consequence out of there.
All right. So if people want to be involved in the Arizona campaign, this will be all over our website, but it's savedemocracyaz.com. But Eric, if you're a veteran and you really want to be involved nationally in this effort, how do you take part?
Yeah. So please go to our website. It's a long name, Veterans for Political Innovation. The shorthand is v-pi.org. v-pi.org, our website. If you click Take Action, complete our volunteer intake form, you'll actually receive a link that you can use to schedule an introductory call with me. And then we onboard our task force leaders to get embedded with reform campaigns in the cities and states where they live. So we're a national platform, but we're activated locally. And so any veteran in Arizona, we're going to send them right back to you, Paul, and to the team that you're working with to pass Final Five voting in Arizona.
All right, so I got to give you one last Annapolis grad story. So when I was mayor, I fought like cats and dogs with a guy by the name of John McCain. I mean, we were always fighting, right? And remember, I was mayor at 30, but sometimes I thought he was just brutal to me. Well, in any event, after I left and after he lost his first presidential race, he was walking by me. We were in some event, and he had a group of security behind him from having been a presidential nominee. And he got a little past me. We gave one another kind of a bad look when he went by me. And he stopped, made his people stay there. He walked back to me, and he said, hey, he said, I spent time in a prisoner of war camp. And he said, and sometimes that made me just see things as either I liked you or I didn't like you. You were either on my side or you were my enemy. He says, I didn't treat you right. And I just want you to know, I'm sorry. And he stuck out his hand. I swear to you, I didn't know what to say. Right? I shook his hand. In fact, there was a Democratic person standing next to me who said, that did not just happen. Well, we became friends. Right. And I helped him in his race for Congress. Later on, he ran against a guy named J.D. Hayworth in a primary, but I helped him in a number of other races, and we became pretty good friends. He helped me on some of the things that we were interested on political reform. What became so clear to me in watching him, first, he was a naval grad. He was someone who had served this country incredibly well. But I had missed out on his gifts, because the two political parties divided us, because politics divided us, because the system divided us, and because we played into it. I had lost the gifts that he had to be able to offer. And I hope he felt the same way about me, that maybe there were some gifts that I had to offer as well. I can't tell you how much I appreciate the service that both of you have given to this country. I'm very proud that both of you are Annapolis grads. That's an amazing thing to me. I know how difficult that is, and I know how important the service that you've given to our country has been. But I think what you're doing moving forward is maybe one of the most important missions you've ever been on. My hat is off to both of you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thanks for all the great work you're doing, and for your lifetime of public service as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, I'd like to thank Eric and Chris for their contribution to this great effort. As I said before, the Optimistic American's goal is to try and help rekindle the American spirit. And I think what you saw here today is that's the American spirit in action. I'd also like to tell you that we really appreciate your support. Certainly, we appreciate you pushing that subscribe button. And if you get a chance and you want to try to get more of these videos talking about reform, go to optamerican.com/premium program and become one of our Patriot members. Thanks again. Enjoyed talking to you. Paul Johnson with the Optimistic American. Thanks for joining the Optimistic American Show. Now help us grow by subscribing to our channel. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a like and a comment. There is so much more that we have planned. We can't wait for you to embark upon this journey with us.